Good afternoon. This is a meeting of Wilmington City Council's Finance Committee. This is the third in a series of budget hearings to review the budget for Mayor Dennis Williams' fiscal year 2014. Today we will be hearing from two departments, the Office of Economic Development and the Department of Parks and Recreation. Number 4, discuss the $2 million capital budget and program request for land acquisition and site improvements pertaining to leveraging private redevelopment opportunities in South Wilmington and other citywide sites.
Some of you on City Council may know the difference between the Strategic Fund and the Economic Development Capital Fund. But it's worth just reviewing that difference for you. And first, I'm going to describe what the dollars are used for in the Economic Development Capital Fund, and then I'll address the timing and the amount of those dollars. What's different about the Economic Development Capital Fund, those are dollars that are spent on assets. So the Strategic Fund we use, of course, to make job creation incentives to companies. You can think of the Capital Fund as dollars we use to install infrastructure to allow redevelopment projects to go through. I've got a couple of examples here I'd like to offer up. But before I do that, let me note that our capital fund dollars over the years are generally matched by private sector investment and by dollars committed from the State Department of Natural Resources and State Department's Transportation. You can see some of the examples I have. The Speakman Place project, 71 new townhomes. Capital dollars were used to put the streets and the infrastructure in for that project. Christina Crossing Shopping Center. We moved in conjunction with Delmarva, but at the city's expense, a 12-inch high-pressure gas line that ran underneath that site. It was required to move it for the construction. We relocated it. We also committed to install 2 signalized intersections, and those are the intersections you go in and out of the ShopRite parking lot today. So those are examples from economic development, job generating, property tax, wage tax generating projects. This last bullet point here, the final bullet point, the South Wilmington flood mitigation conservation effort. Councilwoman Shabazz supported legislation 3 years ago to purchase 2 acres of land on Walnut Street. We used our capital fund to do that. Those acres will be combined with the upcoming wetlands redevelopment project. And what we don't use for that project, we might be able to put back to the private sector or to another city use, the frontage right along Market Street. So those are some examples. Now to address the timing and the amount. Why are we asking for this money now? Well, you can see our balance is down to $450,000. All of those projects I mentioned just now, we had built up over the course of 10 years since I started here in 2002. In 2010, in the capital improvements plan, we asked for $2.6 million. As you guys well know, that was cut due to the budget challenge. So now we're recommending that we program another $2 million, and when we go to the bond market, when the city goes to the bond market, we'll have that infusion to use for future projects. Again, I would rather have $2 million every other year, but I think if we start with $2 million, that'll be sufficient.
If you compare the 2012 capital budget to the proposed 2014 capital budget, the $2 million was in the 2012 budget, but no money was earmarked for it. It was there to say something was going to be done. That language associated with the $2 million was not specific as to any community. such as South Wilmington. That language has been changed now to South Wilmington. I consulted with Councilwoman Shabazz, who's the district council person, and certainly if there's going to be an infusion of money for some project down there, I would assume that she would have been aware of it, and she was not aware of any project. Is the money earmarked for South Wilmington project specific?
Great question. The answer is no. First off, we work with the Department of Planning to come up with the titles and the descriptions. We were very certain to put in South Wilmington and other sites throughout the city. So South Wilmington just happens to be one of the areas of the city where there are sort of large, underutilized tracts of land, as we know. There's probably the high probability that is where large-scale redevelopments that require new roads will go.
So why don't we omit South Wilmington in terms of its specificity and simply say citywide? That would cover South Wilmington.
It would, and in fact, I can't give you the reason now that when we sat down with planning that changed, but I'd be happy to find out the reasoning and get back to you.
The language in 2012 talked about leveraging jobs in the private sector. That language was deleted. Is there any particular reason why that language was deleted also? We had asked these questions offline
Sure.
before we got to this point and didn't get any response. So at this point in time, I'm asking the questions in a public hearing to get a response if you have one.
It's been a couple of months since we worked with planning on the description. I can tell you, Council President, as I mentioned, these dollars are generally used in conjunction with private sector investments to create development projects that will lead to jobs, new residents.
So why don't we say that?
I'd be happy to. I have to defer to the protocol, but I'm more than happy to follow your advice and work with planning and update the language.
Well, we'll work together.
Sure.
Don't follow my advice. We'll work together. That's what we'll do.
I'd be happy.
Okay, because we tried to do it offline before we got to this point, didn't get any response back. So we're here, and now we're like partnering and working through this together. So I guess we're forced to work together. So it's not my advice, it's what we're going to do together. Okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I know you said it's been an annual contribution to the Convention Center, Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as Wilmington Renaissance Corporation. Do we get any residual services back from those contributions? Number one and two, the contributions to the Wilmington Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as the Wilmington Renaissance Corporation. Did we get any residual services?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. Director Gray has a seat on the Wilmington Convention Visitors Bureau board, but he's relatively new to that position. So I'll give you my answer from my exposure to past directors. The Convention and Visitors Bureau advertises events both in Wilmington and in the county and drives outside visitors to hotels in the city. If I had to summarize their greatest contribution to our residents, it would be that, which of course keeps our hotels full, jobs, so forth and so on. We partnered with the Convention and Visitors Bureau 2 years ago on an interesting project whereby they raised some funding and rented a bus or jitney for conventions down at the riverfront and committed over several conventions to drive people back to the Wilmington hotels. And that was a differentiating point when some conferences were considering which city to go to. So that's an example of a sort of a project contribution that I can give you. The Wilmington Renaissance Corp, they traditionally do some major events in the city. I think the most well-known event is the bike race. If the city of Wilmington became a member of the WRC, under the same pricing guidelines that businesses and corporations are required to adhere to, the number would be much higher. And it's always been that the city has a seat at the board, and of course, we're not going to, it's not something that we can afford to contribute a lot of money to. So that's how we've come up with the $10,000. I think it's been pretty consistent over the years. But to answer your question specifically, it has to do with the events that they manage.
Okay, provide an update on the revenues generated and collected directly associated with Office of Economic Development's efforts for fiscal year 10 through fiscal year 13 year-to-date.
Certainly. I'm going to address this question in two parts. First, I've provided 4 years of historical data for wage taxes. Now, these are the wage taxes generated by the 23 or so companies that have received strategic fund job incentive grants over the past 10 years. You can see for the first time we've broken over the $5 million annual mark. Years ago, we were in and around $2 million a year. And so I think it goes to show that the wisdom that the city and the city council had years ago to set this fund up. It generally returns for every dollar about $4 in wage taxes. Does anyone have any questions specific to wage taxes generated by the strategic fund? I mean, these are companies like AAA, Blue Cross Blue Shield, as well as smaller companies. We recently extended an offer to Maisley Glove, who some of you attended their opening. So it's not just for large companies. In fact, we don't differentiate between small and large. It's all based on the projected wage taxes, the amount of the incentive we give.
Council President Gregory.
These strategic fund that you just mentioned would relate back to the earlier matter where it's now down to 2.1 except for what's in the pipeline. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how much did you say we get off of each dollar we put in that fund?
The average is about $4 to every $1.
Okay. So if we put $100,000 back and we use it, we would get $500,000. Get $2 million. We get 500,000 times 4. It's a good investment.
Yeah.
In other words,
Yep.
okay. It's a good policy investment, and possibly a poor shift in policy to delete that $500,000, in my opinion. That's in
I
my
couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh.
Yes, when you're coming up with these figures, especially in the wage tax, do you keep a base for how many employees they have, what the price ranges are on their pay, or anything like that, or does another department do that?
Well, we keep a spreadsheet that tracks number of employees, and then we can calculate average pay per employee. And we work very closely with the finance department. In fact, they help us on a regular basis audit our agreements to determine how much wage taxes are coming in annually or by the quarter. And that's how we can go back and look at our agreements and make sure the company's meeting its goals.
Do you gather, Mr. President, or Mr. Chair, do you gather these statistics once a year, or do you ask them for updates like every 3 months, so you can see a trend if one of the businesses might appear to be in trouble, if they start cutting back?
We do. We have a requirement, an annual form that businesses submit. And when they don't submit it, we call them up. Some businesses actually report to us quarterly, some of the larger ones like Blue Cross. And then we work with finance generally on a quarterly basis. And of course, in preparation for our meeting today, we went back and got all the latest figures. So I'd be happy to share some of that that data with you. Sometimes determining the number of employees at a given company can be challenging because of the mix between part-time and full-time. And if you go to get that data from the head tax file, sometimes there are more heads than actually they have, or if you try and use W-2s, that's probably a better example. There might be more W-2s filed than actual full-time employees, but we do a pretty good job at narrowing it down. And yes, we can see companies that have run into trouble.
I would think some of that, for the bigger companies too, might be seasonal too, where you would be able to tell if it was a little bit higher or a little bit lower.
It's interesting. I've never noticed any seasonal trends, but they probably do exist.
Like the stadium would be a good example.
Yeah.
You know, they have business for a while and then not so much. And this is for all businesses in the city, nonprofit and for-profit.
No, to be clear, we track the 20 to 25 businesses that we have in the strategic fund program.
Okay.
If
Okay.
to get the return
Okay.
from our
Got it.
investment.
Got it.
Now,
Okay.
we also do things like pull the business license file every month and then sort of cull through that to get a sense for what's happening around the city. And then if anyone from the administration or from council ever wanted to know about a particular company, we offer you come to us. I mean, you could go to finance, but you're welcome to come to us. We'll work with finance and try and get the answers to your questions. Or we'll call the company and see if they'll share the data.
But if a big nonprofit wanted to locate in this city, would they come to you first or would they go to finance first?
They wouldn't.
Well, they go to the mayor's office first, probably, but
There's no policy that drives a new business, whether nonprofit or for-profit, into the city except for a business license, I think. And some of my colleagues might correct me, but, I mean, somebody might come into the mayor's office or the Office of Economic Development, it happens frequently, and say, we're thinking about starting a business, or we've just recently started a business, we want to introduce ourselves, or we may need some help, but it's not required, and so that's what makes it difficult for us to track every new business in the city.
And I must say from experience that lots of companies are very coy about their head count, and especially if they're trending downward, they don't always stand on a soapbox and tell us. So we sometimes have to either read about it or we have to study the finance records to find out what the trend really is.
so when they come in for the incentives, they're all standing in line to shake your hands. When they're moving out of the city, not so much?
That's probably an accurate characterization.
Thank you.
They're probably shaking someone else's hand.
Exactly.
They're trying to help.
Not unless he's up at 2 in the morning when the vans are in the city loaded up.
Right.
Councilmember Shabazz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying this is the return on our investment from the strategic fund of incentivized contributions we've made to companies. And is this the money that we've actually received? Because it's my understanding that some of that final return on our investment takes several years to get it. So you might have made the commitment in 2011, and they don't have to fulfill that full return until their head count reaches a certain number, and it could take several years. So is this actual money that we receive, or this is what's contractual, what we will finally receive once they fulfill that commitment?
These are actual numbers that we received from the 2022 companies that have received grants. But that, you bring up a good point.
Including 2012? So everyone that you made contract with 2012, so that means there's more to come from contracts we've made, because it usually takes several years before they meet their obligation of fulfilling the amount of employees that's going to benefit the city, that we would get the benefit of the wage tax. So anything we did in 2012, have all of those 8 organizations met that commitment, and we've received that full investment return?
Yes, let me explain. So Citibank came into the city roughly calendar year 11. They're going to grow their business to 200 or 300 employees. What you see in calendar year 12, 5.5 million, that's wage taxes that Citibank paid on only about 150 or 190 employees. So we can track, and we do, the curve of wage taxes in the future that we're going to get from these 25 or so companies, and we do that.
So that means that there is what we have invested thus far in the strategic plan, in the strategic fund to those 22 to 25 agencies. There's more money coming to the city once they meet their full obligation? Because you said Citibank, we've already
Yeah,
given
they're
them
going to be here
their
for another
incentive.
9 years at a minimum, maybe more, Citibank. And so they,
So there's still more money coming to the city based on our already investment, incentivized investment thus far. So we should be expecting more money to come in.
absolutely.
Let me just, Jeff, I don't understand how you come up with the $1, $4 formula. I mean, how many years out do you keep counting to come up with that formula?
We don't. We've spent approximately $10 million from 2002 when it was legislated, and we've brought in about $40 million in wage taxes. You don't see that here, but if I extended this calendar back in history to 2002 and then summed the total, it would be $40 million.
All right, so you're saying from 2002, we've invested about $10 million, and taking into account year 12, we'll have brought in about $40 million. All right. If you didn't invest another dollar, would next year you'd be back here saying it's $4.50 because we took in another $5 million in calendar year 13?
If we didn't invest another dollar, it would work like that.
Okay.
And so a couple of things happen. If in good economic times, the private sector has annual increases. So if bonuses, okay? And then some companies like Barclays, who, when we met with them 10 years ago, said these are the number of employees we're going to bring. Well, they've brought far more than that. So is ING, now Capital One. So that there is it's curved.
Have there been any that made promises and didn't keep them and left and things like that? And does that factor in then
It does
to the fact
factor
that
in.
we took a hit in wage tax?
We've had 3 or 4 over the course. Some of them, like Fusora, if you guys remember that, early on, 2003, they returned
Yeah.
their payment
Agree.
to the city. We've also had a bankruptcy. Patria went bankrupt, and they couldn't return our dollars. Now, it was a small amount that we gave them. They were a small startup. So fortunately, we can offset some of the companies that don't make it by the companies that grow in excess of what they first projected.
Council President Gregory.
Are any of these businesses impacted by the abatement or deferred payment programs we used to have? I don't know if we still have them or not, where the person doesn't pay head taxes and/or some other taxes for 5 years or so.
Yeah, that's a great question. As a policy, the city never abates wage taxes.
Okay.
But we do have a head tax abatement program that we work with finance, and that's a 5-year.
So does this number include just wage taxes, not head taxes?
Yes, I don't do head taxes. It's a little bit more of a
Gotcha.
tough calculation. At a future finance committee meeting, I'd be happy to do that. That takes us some time to do.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, head tax program is in force, and I can get copies of that program to City Council if you'd like it.